In my 70s, I realized a simple truth. The older you get, the more often children look at you as if you are an annoying misunderstanding. My name is Eunice Frost. I am 68 years old, and I have spent my entire life working as a primary school teacher in a small school in the town of Hayes. I taught children to read and write for 37 years before retiring. Today, I was driving my old Ford to my eldest son Norris's house, and my heart was beating faster than usual. It was my grandson Aiden's birthday. He was turning 14, and the whole family was getting together for the first time in months. When I pulled up to Norris's two-story house in the suburbs of Hayes, the street was already lined with cars. Pulling over to the curb, I smoothed a gray strand of hair that had escaped from my bun and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The wrinkles around my eyes had deepened, but my eyes were still the same blue as my late husband Lawrence's. He had died 5 years ago, and since then our children had treated me differently, with the indulgent care reserved for helpless old people. I took a neatly wrapped gift from the passenger seat, a kit for building a radio-controlled airplane. Aiden had always been interested in technology. "Grandma's here!" someone shouted as I climbed the steps to the porch. The door swung open and my grandson Aiden appeared on the threshold, a lanky teenager with freckles and a smile so much like my Lawrence's. "Hi, Grandma." He hugged me, but somewhat awkwardly, as if performing a mandatory ritual. I understand that at 14, hugging your grandmother in front of your friends isn't very cool. "Happy birthday, dear," I said, handing him his present. "Don't open it right away, let it be a surprise." In the hallway, I was greeted by my eldest son, Norris, a tall man of 46 with graying temples and a perpetually preoccupied expression. He worked as a manager at an insurance company and always viewed life through the prism of risk and reward. "Mom, you're half an hour late," he said instead of greeting me, glancing at his watch. "We were about to start without you." "There was traffic on the main road," I lied. In reality, I had simply spent a long time deciding what to wear. "Everyone's here." Norris took me by the elbow and led me into the living room, where voices were buzzing and music was playing. Norris and his wife Audrey's living room was spacious and immaculately decorated, like a picture in a magazine. Everything here screamed status and success: leather sofas, crystal vases, paintings in expensive frames. Audrey was an interior designer and used her own home as a showpiece for her clients. "Mom!" My middle daughter Merle, a 42-year-old woman with fiery red hair and a bohemian look, ran up to me. She hugged me, enveloping me in a cloud of floral perfume. "How are you? You look tired." Merle had always been the most emotional of my children. After 2 divorces, she finally found herself in creating ceramic pieces, which she sold online. Her financial situation was as unstable as her mood. "I'm fine, dear," I smiled, "just a little tired from the road." "You need to get more rest." Merle shook her head. "And by the way, that dress? Maybe you should have worn something brighter? I have a few things that would look good on you." I looked down at my dark blue dress with a white collar. Classic never goes out of style, but Merle thought my style was boring. In the other corner of the room, I noticed my younger son, Quincy, with his wife, Shannon. Quincy, a 39-year-old bank clerk, was the quietest of my children. Shannon, on the other hand, had a strong personality and, as far as I could tell, was completely in control of their family life. "Eunice!" Shannon waved at me but didn't move. She never called me mom or mother-in-law, only by my first name, as if we were just acquaintances. I walked over to greet them. Quincy hugged me, but Shannon just gave me a curt nod. "How are you, kids?" I asked. "How are my granddaughters?" "Tanner and Paisley are out with the other kids," Quincy replied, adjusting his glasses. "They're fine. Tanner won the school math competition." "And Paisley is having trouble with English," Shannon added with a hint of irritation. "Her teacher says she's not trying hard enough." "I could help her," I offered. "After all, I've been teaching my whole life." "We hired a tutor," Shannon cut me off. "Teaching methods have changed a lot since you were teaching, Eunice." I felt a twinge of hurt, but said nothing. Arguing with Shannon was pointless. Looking around the room, I noticed the tension in the air. Norris kept checking his phone with a worried look on his face. Merle nervously fiddled with the bracelet on her wrist. Quincy looked depressed, and Shannon looked irritated. Something was going on in my family, something they weren't telling me about. Audrey, a slender blonde with flawless makeup and a cold smile, approached the table laden with appetizers. Eunice, it's good to see you, she said, not looking me in the eye. I hope you didn't bring cake. I ordered a special gluten-free, sugar-free dessert. Kids eat so much junk food these days. No, I just brought a present for Aiden, I replied. But I can help in the kitchen if you need it. Oh, don't bother, Audrey quickly objected. I've got everything under control. I walked over to the sofa and sat down next to Aiden, who was already unwrapping my present. Wow, he exclaimed when he saw the airplane model kit. That's cool, Grandma. Thank you. His sincere joy warmed my heart. I wanted to ask him about school and his friends, but at that moment Norris and Audrey approached us. Aiden, put your present down for now, Norris said. We're about to cut the cake, and then you can open all your presents. But Dad, it's an airplane you can build yourself, Aiden protested. I said put it away, Norris repeated in a tone that brooked no argument. I noticed how sad my grandson's face looked and couldn't help myself. Norris, the boy just wanted to look at his present. What's wrong with that? Norris looked at me with obvious irritation. Mom, we have rules in this house. Please don't undermine my authority in front of my son. I didn't mean to. Let's not spoil the holiday, Audrey interjected with a forced smile. Eunice, maybe you can help set the table? The children want to play a board game before cake. I got up and followed Audrey into the kitchen, feeling Aiden's gaze on me. My grandson put the airplane back in the box with a look on his face as if he had just been forbidden to have fun. In the kitchen, Audrey began arranging canapes on a platter, clearly not needing my help. What's going on? I asked bluntly. I feel like something's wrong. Audrey froze for a moment, then sighed. It's nothing, Eunice. Norris is just having a rough time at work, and your comments are only making things worse. What comments? I just wanted Aiden to enjoy his present. It's not just that, Audrey lowered her voice. Every time you come over, you try to teach us how to raise our children. It's annoying. I felt myself blushing with hurt and indignation. I'm not teaching anyone. I just want to be involved in my grandchildren's lives. Participating is one thing, interfering is quite another, Audrey snapped, returning to her canapes. At that moment, Merle entered the kitchen. What are you whispering about? She asked, looking at us suspiciously. Nothing in particular, Audrey replied. Just discussing the menu. Mom, Merle turned to me. Could you take a look at the lawnmower in the garage? Nora says it's making a strange noise, and you always knew about these things, just like Dad. In the garage? Right now? I asked in surprise. Isn't it better to celebrate Aiden's birthday first? It'll only take 5 minutes, Merle insisted. And the kids want to play Monopoly before cake, you'll just be bored. Something in her voice sounded fake, but I decided not to argue. Maybe my kids really did want to discuss something without me. Okay, show me where the lawnmower is. Merle led me through the house to the garage door with obvious relief. On the way, I noticed her exchange glances with Quincy, who was standing at the entrance to the living room. Norris's garage was spacious and perfectly organized, like everything else in his house. The lawnmower stood against the far wall. There, Merle pointed to it. Norris says it makes a strange noise when he starts it. Let's take a look. I leaned toward the lawnmower, although I knew almost nothing about modern technology. Lawrence was the handyman in the family, not me. Thanks, Mom, Merle said suddenly and quickly headed for the door. Wait, aren't you going to show me what the problem is? I asked in surprise. Norris will explain later, she said over her shoulder and slipped out the door. I heard the lock click and froze in confusion. A second later, it dawned on me. I was locked in. I rushed to the door and jiggled the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. Merle, I called. What's going on? Open the door. Sorry, Mom, my daughter's muffled voice reached me. We need to discuss something without you. We'll let you out in an hour, I promise. What? Are you kidding? I couldn't believe my ears. Open the door immediately. Mom, I now heard Norris's voice. Please don't make a scene. There's a chair you can sit on. We want to talk about some family matters, and to be honest, your advice isn't going to help right now. It's nothing personal, Mom, added Quincy's voice. Just sit quietly and don't disturb us, okay? I stood frozen in the middle of the garage. My own children had locked me out like a naughty child so I wouldn't disturb them. My eyes stung with tears of hurt and anger. Why were they doing this to me? What had I done? Grandma? A soft voice suddenly came from the other side of the door. It was Paisley, my youngest granddaughter. Are you okay? Yes, dear, I replied, trying to sound calm. Don't worry about me. Paisley, go inside. Shannon's sharp voice rang out, and I heard the girl run away. I slowly sank down onto a chair in the corner of the garage. My children, whom I had raised with love and care, had decided that I was not worthy of being present at a family council, that I was just a nuisance that needed to be gotten rid of. Sitting in the dim light of the garage, I remembered how Lawrence loved to tinker here when we came to Norris's house. He was a handy man, he could fix anything. And then it dawned on me. Lawrence, the garage, the secret door. I stood up and looked around with renewed interest. If memory served me right, there should be a passageway somewhere here that Lawrence had made many years ago when Aiden was just a baby. A passageway our children didn't know about. A passageway leading straight to the kitchen utility room. I stood in the middle of the garage, peering into the dim light and remembering Lawrence's words. The first wave of resentment had already subsided, giving way to cold determination. If my children thought they could just lock me out and continue having fun, they didn't know their mother very well. The secret door. It had to be here somewhere. I remembered clearly how Lawrence had shown it to me many years ago. I walked along the garage wall, feeling every inch of the surface. The lighting here left much to be desired. There was only one dim light bulb on the ceiling, but I remembered that the passage was behind a large wooden tool cabinet. Lawrence had made it when Aiden was about 5 years old. Eunice, he said back then, smiling slyly, children always need a miracle at Christmas. And for a miracle, you need Santa, who quietly puts presents under the tree. The cabinet was still in the same place, only now it was covered with bicycle helmets and jackets. I walked over to it and gently pulled on the edge. The cabinet was surprisingly light and slid aside almost effortlessly. Behind it was a small door painted the same gray color as the garage wall. If you didn't know where to look, you would never notice it. My heart began to beat faster. I knelt down in front of the door and felt for a small latch. Despite its age, it gave way easily. The door opened silently. Lawrence always made sure the hinges were well oiled. In front of me was a dark, narrow passageway. The tunnel leads straight to the kitchen pantry, Lawrence had once explained. I persuaded Norris to do a little remodeling when they first bought the house. I said the pantry would be more convenient if we added an extra shelf for storing canned goods, and I knocked through the wall from the garage myself. Lawrence was an incorrigible romantic. He loved creating Christmas magic for his grandchildren. Every year, he would sneak through this tunnel to put presents under the tree while everyone was asleep. I crawled into the tunnel, which was narrower than I remembered. Apparently, I had gotten a little wider over the years, and I was no longer young enough to crawl through narrow passages, but my resentment gave me strength. I moved slowly and carefully so as not to make any noise. The last thing I wanted was to be discovered in the middle of this crawl space. It would be a complete embarrassment. The tunnel was short, only a few meters long. At the end, I could see another small door. I crawled up to it and listened. Silence. That meant there was no one in the utility room. I pushed the door cautiously and it opened. The utility room was a small room filled with shelves of kitchen utensils and canned food. The only light came through a narrow crack under the door leading to the kitchen. I climbed out of the tunnel, quietly closed the door behind me, and dusted off my dress. Then I crept up to the door and pressed my ear against it. I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. I recognized Audrey and Shannon. They were discussing something, clattering with dishes. Are you sure she'll be comfortable there? Shannon asked. She's not a young girl after all. There's a chair and it's not for long, Audrey replied. We need to discuss this today while we're all together. You know Eunice. She'll start giving us advice as if we were still children. Quincy is worried. Shannon's voice became quieter. He says it's cruel. Remind your husband that we're talking about his mother's well-being. We're not the first to deal with these issues with elderly parents. I frowned. What were they talking about? What best interests? Mommy! A child's voice rang out. When are we going to cut the cake? I want cake. Wait, Tanner, Shannon replied. The adults need to talk first. Where's Grandma? The girl asked. Grandma's busy, Shannon replied sharply. Go play with the other kids. I heard the kitchen door open and close behind the wall. The voices fell silent. I carefully opened the utility room door a few inches and peeked out. The kitchen was empty. It was the perfect time to get out of there and figure out what was going on. But instead of going out and causing a scene, I decided to do something else. What if I used this situation to find out what my kids really wanted to talk about? Why were they trying so hard to keep me out of the conversation? I left the utility room and tiptoed across the kitchen. I knew my way around Norris's house well, and knew that from the kitchen you could walk unnoticed into a small hallway leading to the guest bathroom. From there, you could hear everything that was going on in the living room. Sliding into the hallway, I stopped at the bathroom door and listened. I could hear my children's muffled voices coming from the living room. I don't understand why we can't discuss this normally with Mom, said Quincy. Locking her in the garage is going too far. Because she'll throw a fit like she did last time I suggested she hire a housekeeper, Norris replied. She's stubborn and doesn't want to admit that she can't manage on her own anymore. Come on, Merle interjected. Mom is perfectly sane and doing just fine. She's just lonely in that big house. Lonely? Norris snorted. Have you seen her heating bills? She heats the whole house just because she refuses to move to a smaller apartment. It's not practical. That house is all she has left of Dad, Merle said quietly. You know how much she cherishes her memories. Memories can be kept in photo albums, Norris snapped. And money is better spent on a decent old age than on heating empty rooms. I pressed my hand to my mouth. So that's what they wanted to talk about. Me moving out of the house where I had lived all my life with Lawrence, where my children had grown up. Out of a house where every corner held memories of our family. I found a great retirement home, Shannon chimed in. Sunny Hills. They have medical staff, organize activities, and serve 3 meals a day. And most importantly, she'll be among people her own age, not alone in that huge house. A retirement home? Merle repeated. Are you crazy? Mom would never agree to that. That's why we're discussing it without her, Norris sighed. We need to decide everything between ourselves first and then present her with a fait accompli. Otherwise, she'll resist, just like she did last time with the car. I remembered our last big fight. 6 months ago, Norris tried to convince me to sell my old Ford and stop driving. We had a big argument then. I said some harsh things to him and didn't answer his calls for 2 weeks. In the end, I kept the car, but Norris was still hurt. Have you thought about just visiting her more often? Asked Quincy. Come over once a week, help around the house, invite her over. I have a job, 2 kids, and a bunch of responsibilities, Norris replied. I can't drive across town every week. And selling her house has nothing to do with the fact that it's in an area where real estate is being snapped up for a new shopping center? Merle asked suddenly. The room fell silent. What does that have to do with anything? Norris asked coldly. You know exactly what I mean, Merle insisted. Your insurance company is financing this project. You yourself told us last Christmas how much money it would make for the investors. I just want our mother to live in comfort and safety, Norris said firmly. And you, as always, are looking for a catch where there isn't one. Enough, Audrey intervened. You're arguing like children again. We need to resolve this calmly and rationally. Let's ask the children, Shannon suggested suddenly. Aiden, Tanner, Paisley, come here. I heard the sound of children's feet running. Kids, Shannon said in a honeyed voice. Do you think Grandma Eunice would be happier living in a beautiful home with lots of other grandmas and grandpas, where there are doctors and interesting activities? Can we visit her? Aiden asked. Of course, Norris assured him. Even more often than now because this house will be in the city not far away. Then maybe she'll be happier, Aiden said uncertainly. But I like Grandma's house, Paisley said quietly. It smells like cookies and old books. You can bake cookies anywhere, Shannon snapped, and books just collect dust. Mom, Grandma Eunice loves her house, Paisley insisted. She always says that every crack in the wall tells a story. Honey, adults know better what older people need, Shannon said. Now go play. We need to figure this out. I heard the children reluctantly leave. Silence fell again in the living room. Then Quincy spoke up. Maybe we shouldn't rush into this? Let's talk to Mom first and find out what she wants. What's she going to say? Norris smiled. I'm doing just fine. Don't meddle in my life. Quincy, be realistic. Mom is getting old. It's hard for her to keep the house and garden in order. The last time I visited, the porch was covered with fallen leaves and the kitchen faucet was dripping. She just won't admit she needs help. Let's offer her help, not a nursing home, objected Quincy. Listen, Norris lowered his voice. There's something else. Last month, Mom forgot to turn off the oven. Mrs. Clegg's neighbor called me and said she smelled gas and went to check. Can you imagine what could have happened? I racked my brain. There had indeed been such an incident. I had put a pie in the oven and been distracted by a call from Merle. Then I forgot about the oven and went out into the garden. But was that a reason to send me to a nursing home? One incident doesn't prove anything, Quincy insisted. It could happen to anyone. What about last Thursday, when she didn't recognize the mailman she's been greeting every day for the last 15 years? Norris continued. Mrs. Clegg said Mom looked at him like he was a stranger. That's not true. I know our mailman Jim very well. He was just being replaced by another guy, a young man with tattoos. How am I supposed to know all the mail carriers in town? Norris is exaggerating, Merle interjected. Mom is perfectly fine for her age. Yes, she's a little absent-minded sometimes, but who among us doesn't forget things? That's not the only thing, Norris sighed. The house needs repairs that will cost a fortune. The roof is leaking, the foundation is cracking. It's easier to sell it now while the price is still good and use the money to provide for Mom's old age. And how much of the sale will we set aside for Aiden's college tuition? Merle asked sarcastically. What do you mean? Norris's voice sounded steely. Just that you're the only one of us who will benefit financially from selling Mom's house, Merle replied. Your insurance company works with developers, doesn't it? Merle, you're going too far, Audrey interjected. Norris just wants what's best for Eunice. No, let him finish, Norris said coldly. You think I'm trying to profit off my own mother? Yes, my company works with developers, but that has nothing to do with Mom and her house. Really? What about the bonus you told Quincy about when you were fishing? Merle persisted. For bringing new properties into the project? Were you eavesdropping on our conversation? Norris asked indignantly. No, Quincy told me, Merle replied. He was shocked by your offer. I glanced at the living room door, trying to imagine what was happening in there. Did Norris really want to sell my house for his own gain? And was he trying to involve the other children in this scam too? I never said I wanted to sell Mom's house for a bonus, Norris said quietly and angrily. I just mentioned that there was an opportunity to help both Mom and myself at the same time. She can't live there alone anyway, and the house is empty most of the time. And how much will you get for this help? Merle asked. 20% of the sale price, Norris replied reluctantly. But that's standard commission for real estate agents, nothing special. Real estate agent? Quincy asked. Are you a real estate agent now? I have a license, Norris defended himself. I got it last year to earn some extra money. And the first thing you decided to do was sell your mother's house? Merle smiled bitterly. What a great start to your career. A heavy silence hung in the living room. I stood pressed against the wall, feeling my hands tremble. Norris, my eldest son, whom I had always trusted, was planning to sell the house where I had lived all my life for some bonus. And he was using my concern as an excuse. That's not true, Norris finally said. I really am worried about Mom. She can't live alone in such a big house. It's dangerous. The money from the sale will help provide her with a comfortable retirement. The fact that I get a commission is just a side effect. A side effect worth 20% of the value of the house. Merle snorted. Very convenient. Do you have any other suggestions? Norris snapped. Maybe you're willing to take Mom into your tiny apartment above the pottery studio? Or maybe you'll pay for a caregiver? Oh, right, I forgot. You can barely make ends meet with your clay pots. Norris! Audrey snapped at him. No, let him finish, Merle said quietly. Go on, brother. Tell her what a failure I am, who can't take care of her mother. Unlike you, a successful manager with a big house and a perfect family. I heard footsteps receding. Someone left the living room. A second later, Merle appeared in the hallway, walking quickly and wiping away tears. I barely had time to hide behind the bathroom door. When Merle's footsteps faded, I cautiously peeked out. The hallway was empty. Muffled voices could still be heard coming from the living room, but it was impossible to make out the words. I had to find another place to eavesdrop. I moved cautiously along the wall, trying not to creak the floorboards. I should be able to hear better from the dining room, which was connected to the living room by an archway. Once in the dining room, I hid behind a large sideboard and listened. Now the voices were clearer. From my hiding place behind the sideboard in the dining room, I could hear the conversation in the living room perfectly. Norris was pacing nervously around the room, his shadow flickering on the wall. Merle was always too emotional, he said. I don't understand why she's always trying to make me look like the villain. Because sometimes you really do act like a villain, Quincy replied quietly. Seriously, Norris? 20% of the sale of Mom's house? And you say you're doing it for her own good? What's the big deal? Norris defended himself. The house has to be sold anyway. What difference does it make if I get the commission or someone else does? The difference is that it creates a conflict of interest, Quincy explained. You can't be objective when it comes to selling. Norris sighed heavily and sank into his chair. Fine, forget about the commission. I'll give it up if it bothers everyone so much. But you have to admit that Mom can't live alone in that house anymore. Why are you so sure? Shannon asked. Eunice seems perfectly capable of taking care of herself. Because, Norris faltered, then continued more quietly. Because I need that money. I need it badly. The room fell silent. Are you in debt? Quincy finally asked. Worse, Norris lowered his voice so much that I had to strain to hear. I could lose my job. The company is downsizing and my department is under fire. If I don't bring in a big deal in the next 2 months, I'll be out on the street. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Norris, who had always boasted about his successful career, was on the verge of being fired? And he decided to use my house as a lifeline? Why didn't you say anything before? Asked Quincy. What was I supposed to say? Hi, I'm a loser who's about to lose his job. Norris smiled bitterly. I tried to solve the problem myself. This project with the new shopping center is my last chance. If I bring in a few large properties, not only will I not get fired, but I'll be promoted to department head. And you decided to start with your mother's house? Quincy shook his head. Seriously? Her house is perfectly located for the project, Norris explained. Developers have had their eye on it for a long time. And yes, I'll get a nice commission, which will help pay the bills while I look for a new job if things don't work out. But my mom really can't live there alone anymore. This isn't a made-up story. Audrey, who had been silent until then, walked over to her husband and put her hand on his shoulder. You should have told us, she said gently. We're family, we could help. How could you help? Norris asked bitterly. Merle owes rent on his workshop and Quincy is barely making his mortgage payments. None of you are in a position to help. I froze. So Merle was having financial problems? She never mentioned it in our conversations. On the contrary, she always assured me that her business was going well. How do you know about my debts? Merle was standing in the living room doorway. She had come back and, judging by the sound of things, had heard enough. You're not the only one who knows how to gather information, Norris replied wearily. I saw the debt notice in your bag when you came for Thanksgiving. Merle blushed and crossed her arms over her chest. You were looking through my things? It fell out when you were looking for your keys, Norris explained. I just picked up the paper and couldn't help noticing the amount. $4,000 for rent? Seriously, Merle? How long have you been behind? 3 months, Merle replied quietly. But I made an arrangement with the landlord to pay it off. I'm getting a big order from a gallery downtown soon, and I'll pay it all back. And you didn't say anything, Norris shook his head. And you accuse me of not sharing my problems. That's different, Merle argued. I'm not trying to sell my mother's house to solve my problems. No, you just periodically borrow money from her for materials and never pay it back, Norris retorted. Merle clenched her fists. I was going to pay it all back as soon as I got paid for the order. Sure, Norris said skeptically. Just like last time, and the time before that. I bit my lip. It was true that Merle often asked me for small amounts of money until payday, but I never thought much of it. It was important to me that she was doing what she loved. I didn't know her financial situation was so serious. Enough, Quincy interrupted. We're getting off topic. We were talking about Mom and her house. Yes, let's get back to Mom, Norris agreed. The fact remains that she can't live alone in that huge house. We all understand that. The only question is how to convince her to move. Why not suggest she rent out the house? Quincy asked suddenly. She could move into a smaller apartment and live off the rental income. Can you imagine what would happen to the house after the tenants moved out? Norris frowned. Mom would be horrified. And who would deal with all the rental issues? Finding tenants, screening them, dealing with repairs? You? I could, Quincy said quietly. Out of the question, Shannon replied sharply. You don't have time for that. You're barely managing your job and family as it is. Quincy glanced quickly at his wife and fell silent. I noticed him clench his jaw, but he didn't argue. Shannon always had power over him that I didn't understand. Sunny Hills is the best option, Shannon continued. I've checked it out. The conditions are very good, there's medical staff, and they organize excursions and activities. Eunice won't be bored. Sounds like a prison with amenities, Merle muttered. You're exaggerating, Shannon dismissed her. Many elderly people live there and are very happy. Mom isn't many elderly people, Merle objected. She's an independent, active woman who has lived in her own home her entire life. How do you imagine her in a nursing home? In a retirement community, Shannon corrected. They're different things. Even if it's a 5-star hotel, Merle snorted. Mom will be miserable away from her home. I felt grateful to Merle for saying that. She was the only one who truly understood how much our old house meant to me. This isn't about happiness, it's about safety, Norris objected. What if she falls and can't call for help, or forgets to turn off the gas, or gets lost on her way to the store? You're describing a very sick person, Merle shook her head. Mom is perfectly fine for her age. Right now, yes, Norris agreed. But what about in a year, in 2 years? It's better to decide now, while she's still able to adapt to new circumstances. At that moment, the living room door opened and Audrey entered with a tray of snacks. The kids are hungry, she said. Maybe we should take a break from this discussion. It is Aiden's birthday after all. Right, Norris rubbed his temples. Let's get back to this later. By the way, has anyone checked on Mom in the garage? I'm feeling uneasy. I completely forgot that I was supposed to be locked in the garage. What if someone goes to check on me and I'm not there? I'll check, Shannon volunteered. I could use some fresh air. All this talking is making me tired. She headed for the door, and I realized I had to get back to the garage quickly. But how could I do it without being noticed? I didn't have time to sneak through the secret passage in the utility room. Luckily, Shannon stopped Audrey. Where's the cake? The kids are tired of waiting. It's in the fridge, Audrey replied. But I wanted to serve it later, after the main course. The kids are hungry now, Shannon insisted. Especially Tanner. You know how difficult she is when she's hungry. Audrey sighed. Fine, I'll get the cake. But first we need to light the candles and get everyone together. While they were distracted by the conversation about the cake, I seized the moment and quietly slipped out of the dining room into the hallway. Now I needed to find a safe way back to the garage, or at least a place to hide and think. I moved cautiously down the hallway toward the stairs, leading to the second floor. There were too many people downstairs, too much risk of being seen. It should be quieter upstairs. Climbing the stairs, I found myself in a long hallway with several doors. Norris and Audrey's bedroom, Aiden's nursery, the guest room, the bathroom. I knew this house well, having been here dozens of times. A soft voice came from the half-open door of the nursery. Someone was in there. I crept closer and peeked through the crack. Sitting on the bed was my youngest granddaughter, Paisley, a 12-year-old girl with long dark hair braided into a ponytail. She was writing something in a notebook with a shiny cover, pausing occasionally to look thoughtfully out the window. I knocked quietly on the door. Paisley started and slammed the notebook shut. Grandma? She exclaimed in surprise. Aren't you in the garage? Shh. I put my finger to my lips and slipped into the room, closing the door behind me. I ran away. But don't tell anyone, okay? Paisley's eyes widened, then she giggled. How did you get out? There's a lock on the door. Your grandfather was a handyman, I winked at her. He left me a secret passage. Really? How? Paisley asked excitedly. It's a secret, I said, sitting down next to her on the bed. What are you writing? Paisley blushed and pressed the notebook to her chest. Nothing special, just thoughts. A diary? I guessed. I had a diary when I was your age. I wrote down my secrets and dreams. Paisley nodded hesitantly. Yes, something like that. Mom says it's silly, but I like writing down how I feel. It's not silly, I said seriously. Sometimes our thoughts become clearer when we write them down. Paisley looked at me gratefully and suddenly asked, Grandma, is it true that they want to send you to a nursing home? I sighed, so the children had discussed it in front of their grandchildren. Your Uncle Norris thinks I'd be better off there, I replied cautiously. Do you want to go there? Paisley looked at me with her big gray eyes, so similar to my Lawrence's. No, I replied honestly. I love my house. It's where my memories live. Paisley nodded understandingly. I thought so. Mom says it's better for old people to live with other old people, but I don't understand why. If I were sent to live with other children, I would die of homesickness. I smiled at her directness. Sometimes adults make decisions thinking they know what's best for others. Like my mom decides everything for me, Paisley sighed. What books to read, who to be friends with, what subjects are important. She even makes me go to ballet even though I hate it. I want to take up photography, but my mom says it's a waste of time. I remembered how Shannon always tried to control not only her children's lives, but also her husband's. Quincy rarely argued with her, preferring peace in the family to open conflict. Have you talked to your dad about this? I asked. Paisley shook her head. Dad always agrees with Mom. He says she knows what's best for my future. How familiar that sounded. Quincy, my youngest son, had always been the most compliant of my children. As a child, it seemed like a charming trait, but as an adult, it had become a problem. You know, sometimes you have to stand up for what's really important to you, I said, even if it means disagreeing with the people you love. Paisley looked thoughtfully at her diary, then suddenly handed it to me. Want to read it? Just don't tell Mom. She doesn't let me show my diary to anyone. I was touched by her gesture of trust. Are you sure? Yes, Paisley nodded. I think you'll understand. I carefully took the notebook with its shiny cover and opened it. Paisley's neat handwriting filled the pages, and between the entries were photos, apparently taken on a phone and printed on a small printer. Today my mom yelled at me again for my math grade. She said I'll never get into a good college if I'm so lazy. I'm not lazy, I just don't understand these equations. And when I tried to explain, she said I was making excuses. Why don't adults ever listen? Dad was sitting there silently, even though he knows I have trouble with math. Sometimes I feel like no one in this family understands me. I turned the page and saw a photo of an old oak tree in our garden. Next to it was a note. I visited Grandma Eunice over the weekend. We baked apple pie and walked in the garden. She showed me how to take good pictures of nature, to look for unusual angles and notice details. She planted this oak tree with Grandpa when they first bought the house. Now it's so big. Grandma told me that they often had family picnics under it when Dad and Uncle Norris were little. She didn't make me do my homework or tell me that photography was a waste of time. She just listened to me. Why can't Mom be like that? My heart ached. I had no idea that our weekends meant so much to Paisley. The next entry was very recent, dated yesterday. Tomorrow is Aiden's birthday. We're all going to Uncle Norris's house. Grandma Eunice will be there too. I hope Mom doesn't talk about my grades and ballet all the time. I want to show Grandma my new photos. She's the only one who really looks at them instead of just nodding absent-mindedly. Sometimes I feel like Grandma is the only person who sees the real me, not the girl everyone wants me to be. I closed the diary, feeling a lump rise in my throat. My little granddaughter felt just as misunderstood as I did. We were both surrounded by people who thought they knew what was best for us without asking our opinion. Thank you for sharing that with me, I said quietly, handing the diary back to Paisley. You don't think it's silly, do you? She asked uncertainly. No, sweetie, I said, hugging her shoulders. Your feelings are never silly. And you know what? You're a very talented photographer. I saw your pictures in your diary. You have a real gift for seeing beauty in ordinary things. Paisley's face lit up with a smile. Really? I've practiced so much. But Mom says, not everything adults say is true, I interrupted gently. Even parents are wrong sometimes. Like you in the nursing home? Paisley remarked perceptively. Exactly, I nodded. Your Uncle Norris thinks he knows what's best for me. But only I can decide where I live. What are you going to do? Paisley asked. I thought about it. What could I do? Openly rebel against the children's plans? Make a scene? Or silently accept their decision? I don't know yet, I replied honestly. But I'll think of something. At that moment, Shannon's voice came from downstairs. Paisley, come down. Let's cut the cake. Coming, Mom, Paisley shouted, then turned to me and whispered, What about you? You need to go back to the garage. I nodded. Don't worry about me. I have a plan. Just don't tell anyone I got out, okay? It's our secret. I'll go back to the garage through the secret passage and no one will know. Go enjoy the party. And remember, your photos are beautiful no matter what Mom says. Paisley hugged me and quickly slipped out of the room. I went to the window and looked outside. Aiden's room overlooked the backyard where there was a small garden. Right below the window were thick hydrangea bushes. If I were 20 years younger, I could have climbed down the trellis. But at my age, such stunts were too risky. I had to get back to the garage before anyone noticed I was gone. But how could I do that without attracting attention? And what should I do with the information I had learned? Now I understood what was going on in my family. Norris was on the verge of being fired and saw selling my house as a way to save his career. Merle was deep in debt but too proud to admit it. Quincy let Shannon control him and the children, even when he disagreed with her decisions. And Paisley, my sweet Paisley, feels like a stranger in her own family. All this time, they've been discussing my fate behind my back, deciding how I should live my life without asking my opinion. I felt anger, resentment, disappointment, but most of all, I felt determination. I wouldn't let them treat me like a helpless child. I would prove that I was still capable of making my own decisions. But first, I had to get back to the garage. I quietly left Aiden's room and listened. I could hear voices, laughter, and the clinking of dishes from downstairs. It sounded like everyone had gathered in the dining room for the grand moment with the cake. It was time to make my move. I carefully descended the stairs, trying to stay close to the wall where the steps creaked less. On the first floor, I turned into the hallway leading to the kitchen. From there, I could slip unnoticed into the utility room and return to the garage through a secret passage. The kitchen was empty. Everyone was crowded around the festive table in the dining room. Through the archway, I could see Audrey carrying in the cake with lit candles, and Aiden, surrounded by guests, was getting ready to blow them out. I seized the moment and slipped into the utility room. Closing the door behind me, I felt my way in the dark to the entrance to the secret tunnel. It was where I had left it, behind a shelf with canned goods. Squeezing through the narrow passage, I began my way back to the garage. Thoughts swirled in my head. What was I going to do with what I had learned? How could I use this information? One thing I knew for sure. I wouldn't let the kids decide my fate without me. And if they wanted to play games behind my back, then I could play my own game. A game with rules that I would make up. Returning to the garage through the secret passage, I carefully pushed the cupboard back into place and looked around. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The chair in the corner, the dim light bulb on the ceiling, the locked door. If anyone had looked in here while I was away, they would have assumed I had simply moved to the far corner of the garage. I sat down on the chair and took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. What I had learned about my children weighed heavily on my heart. Norris was on the verge of being fired and saw selling my house as his salvation. Merle was mired in debt, which she was hiding from everyone. Quincy lets Shannon make all the decisions, even when it hurts their daughter. And they all consider me a burden to be gotten rid of by sending me to a retirement home. My first impulse was to storm into the house and tell them everything I thought about their plans and secrets. But what good would that do? Another family fight? Resentment that would smolder for months? No, that wouldn't accomplish anything except further alienating them. I needed a different approach. Something that would make them think about their actions without humiliating them. Something subtle enough that they would learn their lesson without feeling caught red-handed. I closed my eyes and imagined how Lawrence would have handled it. My husband always knew how to find wise solutions in difficult situations. "Eunice," he would say, "people rarely change because of criticism, but they often change because of understanding." And then it hit me. I wouldn't expose their secrets and plans. Instead, I would show them that I understood their problems and was willing to help, but on my terms. I would let them know that I couldn't be excluded from important family decisions, especially those concerning my life. A plan began to form in my head. I had to act quickly and carefully. Judging by the sounds of music and laughter coming from the house, the party was in full swing. They were cutting the cake, handing out gifts, having fun, and completely forgetting about me, locked in the garage. It was the perfect time to act. I pushed the cabinet aside again and slipped into the secret tunnel. This time I moved more confidently, knowing every turn. Once I got out into the utility room, I listened. The kitchen was empty. All the guests had gathered in the living room, where music was playing and laughter could be heard. I carefully left the utility room and crept through the kitchen into the hallway. I needed to get to the second floor without attracting attention. Fortunately, the staircase was at the far end of the house, away from the living room. Once upstairs, I headed straight for Norris and Audrey's room. Their bedroom was immaculate, typical of Audrey with her love of order. There was a desk by the window where Norris often worked at home. His documents must be here. I began to carefully sort through the papers on the desk. Most of them were bills, advertising brochures, and notes. But in the top drawer, I found a folder labeled Oak Hill Shopping Center Project. Inside were documents about a new shopping center project, a map of the area with marked properties, and a list of potential sellers. My house was marked with a red circle and the word priority. Next to it was another document, a notice from the insurance company's management. It said that there would be staff cuts and that Norris's department had to show results by the end of the quarter or it would be disbanded. It all matched what I had overheard. I took the documents and put them in an envelope I had prepared in advance. Inside the envelope was a bank statement, a copy of the document I had received last week. It showed the balance of my savings account, a pretty impressive amount that Lawrence and I had been saving our whole lives. I attached a short note to the statement. "Norris, I know about your problems at work and the shopping center project. I also know that you see selling my house as a solution to your problems. But my house is not just a piece of real estate. It's a place that holds memories of your father, your childhood, and our family. If you need money, let's talk about it openly. I can help you with a loan on favorable terms, but I will make my own decisions about my life. Love, Mom." The next item on my plan was Merle's room. When she came to Norris's house, she usually stayed in the small guest bedroom at the end of the hall. I slipped in and saw her things scattered across the bed, typical of Merle, who was never known for her tidiness. On the nightstand was her well-worn leather-bound notebook. I knew that notebook. Merle always carried it with her and jotted down ideas for her pottery in it. I picked up the notebook and, flipping through the pages, found columns of numbers on the last few pages with notes like rent, supplies, and utility bills. The amounts were underlined in red, with question marks and exclamation points next to them. Scribbled in the margins was, "Call the bank about a deferment." I carefully tore these pages out of the book and put them in another envelope. Inside was a business card from my old friend Dorothy, who ran an art gallery in the city center, and a note. "Merle, I know about your financial difficulties. Why didn't you tell me? We're family, and we should help each other in difficult times. I spoke to Dorothy at the Azure Gallery. She saw your work at the craft fair and was very interested. Give her a call. It might solve your studio rent problem. And remember, there's no shame in borrowing money. but there's shame in not paying it back. But I'm always willing to help without asking for anything in return. Just ask. Love, Mom. Now came the hardest part, finding something that belonged to Shannon. Quincy himself wasn't a problem. He just went with the flow, letting his wife make all the decisions. The key to changing the situation was Shannon. I returned to the hallway and listened. The music was still playing, which meant the party was still going on. I had time. Quincy and Shannon usually stayed in the large guest bedroom next to the children's room. I carefully opened the door and slipped inside. Their clothes were lying on the bed, neatly folded. Clearly Shannon's handiwork. On the bedside table, I saw her phone. It was risky. Shannon could grab her phone at any moment. But I didn't need to take it for long. I grabbed the phone and quickly scrolled through the photo gallery. There were lots of pictures of Tanner at various competitions and Olympiads, but almost no photos of Paisley. The few that were there showed the girl in ballet class. She looked unhappy and awkward. I chose one photo of Paisley at a ballet performance and sent it to the printer in Norris's office. I knew his phone and printer were connected wirelessly. Then I found a photo in Shannon's gallery that had been taken a few months ago at a family picnic. It showed Paisley sitting under a tree, photographing the sunset. Her face was focused and inspired. I sent that photo to the printer as well. I put my phone back and hurried to Norris's office to pick up the printouts. As I expected, both photos were there. I took them and returned to Quincy and Shannon's room. I left the envelope with both photos and a note on Quincy's nightstand. Quincy and Shannon, look at these two photos. Which one shows Paisley looking happy? Every child is unique and talented in their own way. Paisley is a natural photographer with an amazing vision of the world. Why are you forcing her to do ballet, which she hates? Quincy, sometimes you have to find the courage to stand up to those you love when it's for the good of your child. Shannon, loving a child means accepting them for who they are, not trying to make them a copy of yourself. Paisley feels misunderstood and lonely. Talk to her, really talk to her. With love, Grandma Eunice. Now all that was left to do was go back to the garage and wait. I was about to leave when I noticed a stack of glossy brochures on the table by the window. The top one was titled Sunny Hills, A Life Worth Living in Your Golden Years. I picked it up and flipped through it. Beautiful photos of well-kept grounds, bright rooms, smiling elderly people, and prices that took my breath away. Now I understood why Norris was so interested in selling my house. 1 month's stay at Sunny Hills would be enough to deplete my savings in a couple of years. I put the brochure back, but tore out the page with the prices. I planned to use it later. Going downstairs, I heard the music fade and voices coming from the living room. The party seemed to be coming to an end. I had to hurry. I slipped into the kitchen and through the utility room back to the secret passage. Making my way through the narrow tunnel, I climbed out into the garage and pushed the cupboard back into place. Then I sat down on a chair and waited. Less than 5 minutes later, the garage door opened and Shannon appeared in the doorway. Eunice? She called, looking around the dimly lit room. Are you here? I got up from the chair, feigning slight confusion. Of course I'm here. Where else would I be if the door was locked from the outside? Shannon looked slightly embarrassed. We completely forgot about you with all the holiday, she said awkwardly. Norris asked me to tell you he's sorry about the misunderstanding with the door. Misunderstanding? I raised an eyebrow. You mean you didn't deliberately lock me in here to discuss sending me to a nursing home? Shannon paled. What? No, of course not. She faltered, not knowing how to get out of it. Never mind, I waved her off. Where are my grandchildren? I want to wish Aiden a happy birthday. They're in the living room. Shannon backed away, letting me pass. But how did you know about the nursing, the retirement home? The walls are thin, I shrugged, walking past her. And I have excellent hearing. I headed for the house, leaving Shannon standing in the garage doorway with a confused look on her face. The first part of my plan was in place. The children would receive my messages when they returned to their rooms. Now I had to prepare for the second part, the family dinner, where I would finally tell them everything I thought about their plans for me. Entering the house, I went into the living room, where Aiden and the other children were playing video games. My grandson, seeing me, looked up from the screen. Grandma, We thought you had gone home. How could I leave without wishing you a happy birthday? I smiled, hugging him. Did you like my present? Very much, Aiden exclaimed. I've already started putting the airplane together. Do you want to see? Of course, I nodded. Where is it? Upstairs in my room, Aiden pulled me by the hand. Come on, I'll show you. We climbed the stairs to his room. While Aiden enthusiastically showed me the details of the airplane laid out on the table, I glanced furtively down the hallway. At any moment, one of the adults could come into their room and discover my gifts. Grandma, are you listening to me? Aiden noticed my distraction. Of course, dear, I smiled guiltily. I was just thinking about how fast you're growing up. It seems like just yesterday I was teaching you to ride a bike, and now you're 14. Aiden smiled sheepishly. Well, Grandma, you're still the same. Not quite, I winked at him. With age, you either become wiser or grumpier. I try to choose the former. Norris's loud voice came from the hallway. Mom, are you here? Shannon said she let you out of the garage. I'm with Aiden, I shouted back. I'm admiring his new airplane. Norris appeared in the doorway with a forced smile. There you are. We were worried. Really? I raised an eyebrow ironically. I thought you forgot about me locked in the garage. Norris looked embarrassed. Mom, it was a misunderstanding. Merle must have accidentally closed the door. Of course it was an accident, I nodded with an unperturbed expression. And the conversation about the nursing home was also accidental? Norris's face lengthened. Did you hear? Let's discuss it over dinner. I patted his arm. The whole family. Since you've decided that my future is a family matter, let's decide together. Audrey said she made something special for dinner. Yes, but... Norris was clearly not prepared for this turn of events. Great, I smiled, not letting him finish. Aiden, come down when you're done with the plane. Grandma has another surprise for you. I left the room, leaving Norris confused. The plan was working even better than I had expected. Now I had to wait for my messages to be discovered and prepare for the family dinner, where the final scene of my little revenge would unfold. Going downstairs, I walked into the kitchen where Audrey was cooking dinner. How can I help? I asked, rolling up my sleeves. Audrey looked at me in surprise. Eunice, you don't have to. But I want to, I interrupted. After all, family dinner is a great opportunity for all of us to talk about many things. Audrey swallowed nervously and handed me a knife. Then maybe you could cut the salad? I took the knife and began to carefully chop the vegetables, mentally preparing myself for the conversation ahead. Now that the first part of my plan was in motion, all that remained was to wait for the children's reaction and carry out the final part. An open conversation about what I had heard while I was under house arrest. I was overcome by a strange feeling, a mixture of resentment, determination, and, oddly enough, hope. Perhaps this day, which began with humiliation, would be the beginning of a new, more honest relationship in our family. At least I had done everything I could to steer events in that direction. Now all that remained was to wait for my children to go up to their rooms and discover my gifts. And then we would sit down at the table and talk. Really talk, like a family that respects each of its members, including an old retired teacher who is still capable of teaching her adult children a lesson. I finished cutting the vegetables for the salad and handed the bowl to Audrey, who was setting the table. The house grew quieter. The main part of the holiday was over, and the children's excitement over the gifts and cake began to subside. Eunice, could you call everyone to the table? Audrey asked, taking a fragrant lasagna out of the oven. Dinner's ready. I nodded and headed to the living room, where Norris and Quincy were talking quietly in the corner, and Merle was sitting on the couch, leafing through a magazine. The children were playing a board game on the carpet. Dinner's ready, I announced. Audrey made lasagna. I'm coming, Merle replied, putting down her magazine. I'm starving. We're coming, Norris nodded. Let's just finish our conversation first. I noticed a flash of anxiety in his eyes. He was probably afraid that I might reveal what I had heard earlier. Take your time, I smiled. I'll help Audrey set the table. As I returned to the kitchen, I heard Norris quietly say to Quincy, We need to go upstairs before dinner. I want to check some documents. The plan was working. I went back to Audrey and helped her carry the dishes to the dining table. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Norris climbing the stairs to the second floor. A few minutes later, he came back down, holding my envelope in his hand. His face was pale. "Everything okay, dear?" I asked innocently. "You look worried." I, I'm fine, he said, hiding the envelope in his pants pocket. "Just looking for something." "I hope you found it," I continued, setting the table, pretending not to notice anything. Merle also went upstairs, saying she needed to check the phone she had left in her room. When she returned, her eyes were slightly red and she was nervously clutching her notebook. Quincy and Shannon were the last to come up. They needed to check if the kids' things were packed. They were gone longer than the others, and when they returned, the atmosphere between them had clearly changed. Shannon looked irritated, and Quincy was unusually pensive and determined. When everyone gathered at the table, I noticed that my children were avoiding looking at each other and at me. Only my grandchildren were still lively. Aiden talked about his plans for the plane, Tanner bragged about his successes at school, and Paisley sat silently next to me, giving me knowing looks. "Delicious lasagna, Audrey," I said, breaking the awkward silence between the adults. "You have to share the recipe." "Thank you, Eunice," Audrey smiled faintly. "It's my mother's old recipe." The conversation at the table was tense and halting. I asked my grandchildren about school, discussed recipes with Audrey, talked about the weather, the usual safe topics. But the tension was building, and I could feel it reaching a boiling point. Finally, when dessert was served and the children excused themselves to return to their games, Norris cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, pulling my envelope out of his pocket, "we need to talk about what you left in our rooms." Everyone at the table froze. Merle clutched her book tighter. Quincy sat up straight, and Shannon pursed her lips. "Yes?" I feigned surprise. "What exactly?" "You know what?" Norris unfolded the envelope and took out my bank statement. "This and the notes you left. How did you even get out of the garage? Did you really think you could lock up a teacher who's been dealing with inventive children for 37 years? I smiled. "Your father was a jack of all trades." "There are secret passages in this house you don't even know about." "Secret passages?" Shannon asked incredulously. "There's a secret door in the garage that leads to the kitchen pantry," I explained. "Lawrence made it many years ago so he could sneak Christmas presents into the house." "I didn't know about that," Norris muttered. "Of course you didn't," I nodded. "Otherwise it wouldn't be a secret. But it's not about the secret passages. It's about the fact that I heard your conversation while I was locked up. The conversation about sending me to a nursing home." My children looked ashamed. Norris hung his head, Merle began to fiddle with her napkin, and Quincy shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, we didn't mean to hurt you," Norris finally said. "We thought it would be better for you. You live alone in a big house." "Which I love," I said firmly. "The house where I lived with your father for 42 years. A house where every corner holds memories of our family. And you decided that I'd be better off in Sunny Hills, surrounded by strangers, far away from everything I hold dear?" "We're worried about your safety," Quincy interjected. "What if you fall or get sick? Who will help you?" "There's a phone for that," I shrugged. "And neighbors who drop by almost every day. I'm not a recluse, Quincy. I have friends, activities, a life." "What about the oven?" Norris asked. "You forgot to turn off the gas. That's dangerous." "One time in 5 years," I shook my head. "It happens to everyone. Your father once left the iron on all day when you were little, but no one suggested sending him to a nursing home because of that." Norris blushed and looked away. "Norris," I continued more gently, "I know about your problems at work. I know you could lose your job if you don't attract new clients for the shopping center project, and I understand why my house seemed like a convenient solution." "Mom, I didn't mean to use you." Norris looked genuinely upset. "It just happened." "It didn't happen," I shook my head. "You saw an opportunity and decided to take it. But instead of discussing it openly with me, you conspired behind my back." "We knew you'd resist," Merle said quietly. "You've always been stubborn." "Because it's my life," I replied firmly. "And I should be the one making decisions about it, not my children, no matter how well-intentioned they may be." The room fell silent. Then Merle sighed and opened her book where my note was lying. You're right about the debts, she admitted. I should have told you. I just, I was ashamed. Sweetheart. I reached out and squeezed her hand. Never be ashamed to ask your family for help. That's what family is for. To support each other. I called your friend Dorothy, Merle said, sniffing slightly. She's really interested in my work. We're meeting on Monday to discuss the exhibition. I'm so happy for you, I smiled. You've always been talented. You just needed a chance to show it to the world. Quincy cleared his throat. Mom, about Paisley, you're right. We really didn't notice her interest in photography. Shannon showed me the pictures Paisley took. They're beautiful. I know, I nodded. She has your view of the world, Quincy. Remember how you loved to draw when you were little? You always asked for paints for your birthday. I remember, Quincy smiled sadly. Then I grew up and decided it wasn't serious. Who told you it wasn't serious? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Quincy glanced quickly at Shannon, who sat with her back straight and her lips pressed together. I want a stable future for our daughter, she said. Photography is a hobby, not a profession. Annie Leibovitz might disagree with you, I remarked, as would many other successful photographers. Shannon, I understand your desire to provide your children with the best future possible. But sometimes the best future is the one they choose for themselves, following their talents and passions. Shannon didn't respond, but I noticed that her posture had relaxed a little. Anyway, I said, looking around at everyone, I know you're worried about me, and I appreciate that. But I'm not moving to Sunny Hills. I'm staying in my house with my memories and my garden. And if you really want to help, just visit me more often. Bring the kids, call. That's all I need. What about help around the house? Norris asked. Maybe we could hire someone for the heavy stuff, mowing the lawn, for example. That would be nice, I agreed. Although I'm still able to vacuum and cook. And maybe we could set up a schedule, Merle suggested, so that one of us visits you at least once a week. I'd love that, I smiled, especially if you bring the kids. I could help with the computer, Quincy volunteered. Get you better internet, maybe video calls so we can see each other more often. Just don't turn my house into a spaceship, I winked at him. I still prefer paper books to electronic ones. Everyone laughed, and the tension in the air eased noticeably. What about your problems at work? I turned to Norris. How can I help? Norris thought for a moment. You could talk to your neighbors about the project, he suggested. Not to get them to sell their houses, but to reassure them that the changes in the neighborhood won't be a bad thing. The shopping center will bring new jobs and amenities. I'll think about it, I nodded. But no pressure on them, agreed? Agreed. Norris smiled with relief. After dinner, when the children were called to the table for dessert, the atmosphere became noticeably warmer. Paisley sat down next to me and stole a quick squeeze of my hand under the table. Did it work? She whispered. Better than I expected, I replied quietly. We finished dessert, and Audrey offered us coffee. While she was making it in the kitchen, Norris sat down next to me. Mom, I'd like to get back to the conversation we had about the loan you mentioned in your note, he said. It would really help me right now. Of course, I nodded. Come over during the week and we'll discuss all the details. Families should support each other, Norris. Always. When it was time to say goodbye, I hugged each of my children and grandchildren. Even Shannon, who was usually reserved, hugged me back with unexpected warmth. Come visit me next weekend, I suggested, standing in the hallway. We'll have a barbecue in the garden if the weather is nice. We'd love to, replied Quincy. The girls love your garden, and I'll bring my new paintings to show you, added Merle. Maybe you can help me choose the best ones for the exhibition. Sure, I smiled at her. When Quincy, Shannon, and their daughters left and Merle went to her apartment above the studio, Norris helped me load my things into the car. Mom, he stopped at my old Ford. I'm sorry for everything. I really thought I knew what was best for you without asking what you wanted. We all make mistakes sometimes. I stroked his cheek. Even mothers. Just remember that I'm still capable of making my own decisions. I'll remember, he promised. I got into the car and started the engine. Aiden ran out onto the porch, waving his hand. Bye, Grandma, thanks for the plane. Bye, sweetheart, I waved back. Be a good boy. As I pulled out onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Norris, Audrey, and Aiden were standing on the porch watching me drive away. They looked different than they had when I arrived that morning. Warmer, closer, more like a family. My little revenge had worked, though it wasn't revenge in the usual sense of the word. I didn't want to humiliate or shame my children. I wanted them to see me, not as a helpless old woman who could be shoved off somewhere, but as a person with her own desires, feelings, and right to choose. And it seemed that they finally saw me. On the way home, I thought about how one day can change relationships that have been built over years. About how often we forget that our parents are not just parents, but first and foremost people with their own hopes, fears, and right to respect. My house greeted me with its usual silence. I turned on the light in the hallway and smiled as I looked at the photos on the wall. Lawrence, the children, the grandchildren, our whole life captured in these pictures. You would have been proud of me today, Lawrence, I said aloud, looking at my husband's photo. I didn't make a scene or throw a tantrum. I just made them understand. It seemed to me that his eyes in the photograph were smiling back at me. I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on. It had been a long and eventful day, and I was tired. But it was a good kind of tired. The tiredness that comes after a small but important victory. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, I smiled at my thoughts. The best revenge is not revenge at all, but understanding. Understanding that I hoped my children had finally gained today. Understanding that I am still here, still part of their lives, and still capable of teaching them a lesson or two. After all, teaching isn't just a profession. It's a calling that doesn't end with retirement, especially when it comes to your own children, who, as it turns out, still have a thing or two to learn from their mother.